Welcome to NovaraLive. Coming up tonight, got a sense of deja vu? No surprise if so, since Labour is once again weaponising anti-Semitism against who else? The left. Met Commissioner Mark Rowley seems to be spreading disinformation over the anti-genocide marches in the capital. Some people are desperate to say that any criticism of Israel whatsoever is anti-Semitism. And Goodall gives some politicians a pretty hard time over being utterly incoherent. I'm Bastani, and tonight I have the immense pleasure, the joy, the satisfaction of being joined by Michael Walker. Michael, how are we?
Very well. I like to kind of pride myself on remaining relatively relaxed as I'm covering the news cycle. But even this weekend, I found myself shouting at the screen.
Wow.
So much nonsense. Even me.
As somebody who knows Michael very well, that really is saying something. Maybe you were in the same boat. Frustrated, angry. What can I do? Well, I'll tell you what you can do. You can, of course, help us build a new media for different politics. Sign up to support our work by going to novaramedia.com/support. Do something with that frustration. Channel your anger. Help Novara Media.
And for politicians to wade in, as Zach Polanski did, is disgraceful. He's not fit to lead any political party.
Do you agree with the UK's counter-terror chief who said that anti-Semitism is the biggest national security emergency? I wasn't asking you about Benjamin Netanyahu's actions. I was asking if you agree with that view.
He is using his Jewish ancestry as a shield to protect him from what he's doing. He himself is inciting hatred. Again, in his interview with you, he repeated the canard that the Israelis are committing genocide. Now,
people like Mr. Polanski and like his deputy, one of his deputies, Mohsen Ali, are playing politics with the hatred that the Jewish community is regularly experiencing.
Now, unless you've been on a rock all weekend, you'll know that the Labour Party and the mainstream media have fired up their political smear machine, this time aimed directly at Green Party leader Zach Polanski. And they haven't been shy of stooping to a bit of anti-Semitism themselves, as alleged by Polanski, to be illustrated by this cartoon published in the Times on Saturday. That same day, the Mail ran with this headline, extraordinary, accusing Polanski's party of being a party of poison in relation to anti-Semitism. In the wake of a knife attack on 2 Jewish men in North London last week, Polanski has found himself dragged into a political maelstrom over anti-Semitism in the Green Party after he reposted a tweet questioning the level of violence used by arresting police officers at the scene. And the media was hard at work on Sunday trying to implicate him in putting British Jews at risk. This was Trevor Phillips on Sky.
Is it a matter for a conversation? Or do you accept that actually there's not a perception, there is actual unsafety?
Well, I think the conversation is rolling out right now. I definitely think there's unsafety for Jewish people, and I never said there wasn't. I said both were unacceptable.
No, what you said is there needs to be a conversation. I looked at your words,
right,
which suggests that you think that there's a choice and that perhaps some people might be thinking that there's a problem, but there isn't really a problem. So you're telling me this morning that's not in question. You accept that there is actual unsafety, and that's what's going to be tackled.
What I said was spot on. There are times when Jewish people, including myself, are actively unsafe. That's clearly very true, and it's always been true. There's also times where we hear marches, Palestinian marches, that I, as a Jewish person, walk on, where Jewish people say that makes them feel unsafe. Now, I don't think that actually makes them unsafe, clearly, because I'm a Jewish person who is on that march. So I think it's about having a conversation about how do we ensure that Jewish people are safe and Jewish people feel safe at times when they may perceive themselves to be unsafe.
Oh, that's interesting. So these marches where many Jewish people, frankly, most Jewish people that you or I would meet, say that they feel it makes them unsafe. Let me put a thought experiment to you. Imagine you are talking to Shlomi Rand or Norman Shine, the 2 men who were stabbed in Golders Green. How do you persuade them that what happened to them was somehow kind of in their imaginations? I mean, you've got to be clear about this. You can't have it both ways. Either there is something real here, or you're saying that some Jewish people are not making it up, but they're imagining something that is real that isn't real.
Trevor, that's an outrageous distortion of what I just said.
No, I'm kind of repeating what you've just said, what you said earlier in the week, and what you've just said to me, actually.
If people are stabbed, then that is clearly unsafe. It's beyond unsafe. It's outrageous and it's horrific, the attack that happened. We should not and must not pit people facing physical violence against people's freedom of speech and ability to march in relation to a genocide in Palestine.
Now, I don't know about you, but if I had a relative, a loved one, a friend, who was stabbed by somebody on the street, and that person had previously been referred to Prevent, they'd attacked other people in the past, they'd stabbed somebody else earlier on the day, they'd managed to carry on, my first questions would be directed towards the police. I might not blame the police. I might blame the police. I might blame Prevent. I'd have a big question as to how somebody with the set of problems that we now know this person had, in terms of their mental well-being, their history, how they were able to do something like this again. And we see this time after time. We saw it with Axel Ruda-Cabana. We saw it in Nottingham. There are clearly holistic failures with regards to how we deal with people who have mental health issues in this country, clearly. And you'll have a range of views on that and how we address it. If somebody stabbed, like I said, a loved one or a friend of mine, and that was the scenario, you know what I wouldn't do? Be blaming somebody who isn't even an MP and who leads a party with 5 MPs. That is the last person I'd be looking to blame. I might blame the government, I might blame the police, this or that state institution, but I wouldn't be looking squarely at a guy who's a member of the London Assembly saying, how dare you? You've let me down. Does that make any sense? Not at all. Unless, of course, you're in the media. Polanski, predictably enough, was not allowed to answer the question in the way he wanted to.
The person who is conflating anti-Semitism and criticism of the Israeli government is Benjamin Netanyahu.
No. Let's not get onto that. I asked you about the feelings of the Jewish community in this country.
Of which I'm one of them.
Almost nothing to do with what you just started to go on to. And you seem still unsure whether you believe Jews in Britain are unsafe or whether you think actually it's not as bad as some people are making it out.
That's not what I said at all, and that's not what I said last week. I said there are people who are unsafe, Jewish people, and that's clearly true. There are also people who feel like the marches are hate marches. I'm saying as a Jewish person who marches with many Jewish people against the occupation in Palestine, when people say that makes them feel unsafe, that's a distortion of what the march is.
Okay, so you would reject the Macpherson inquiry, Stephen Lawrence inquiry definition of a hate crime as a crime, an incident where either the victim or anybody else who happens to be there perceives it to be a crime motivated by hatred, because there are thousands and thousands of Jews in this city, London, who think that those marches that you're saying you don't feel intimidated by, they think these are hate marches. So you're saying that the Macpherson inquiry, the Macpherson definition, which is what the government stands behind and which police operate today, that's wrong.
Well, as I repeat, as a Jewish person, I march with many Jewish people on those marches. Now, there are already laws to deal with.
But you're not all Jews. I'm just saying that currently the policy is...
But why is my Jewish identity being erased from this conversation?
No, I'm not erasing it.
So many people on those marches.
Don't try that one on me. My point is that currently the policy is that if somebody believes that an incident is a hate crime, whether they are a victim or not, it is recorded as such by the police. It is regarded as such by the courts. What you are saying is because you don't think it's a hate crime, it shouldn't be.
If hate crimes are being committed on the marches, then those should be dealt with, and there's already laws for those. As I said, on those marches, I've not seen hate crimes, and I think it's an outrageous slur on many, many people who are marching for peace. The world is actually upside down.
And others who think it is. What's wrong with that?
Those are not hate marches.
It's in their minds.
Well, I think if they've not seen evidence of them being hate marches, then I think, yes, that is a perception issue.
Isn't it fascinating, Michael, that Trevor Phillips has absolutely no time whatsoever for standpoint epistemology, right? Which is to say that reality is the consequence of one's perception of the world. As a guy who's half Iranian, I get to determine what's racism against Iranians. Michael's a gay guy. As a gay guy, he gets to determine what's homophobic. Trevor Phillips hasn't the slightest time for that as an interpretative lens for the world, including, by the way, for black people. He's black, right? Unless you're Jewish. I'll go further even still, unless you're a Zionist Jewish person. If you're an anti-Zionist Jewish person, they exist. They're not a majority of Jews in this country, but there's lots of them. many of them go on these protests, they're the only people who get to benefit from standpoint epistemology. Not only does he not think that exists for everybody else, he condemns it, actually. He rallies against it, but here he's mobilizing the exact same thought architecture to effectively defend Israel and to defend apologists for Israel.
But Trevor Phillips is like so many people in the media, leading political parties in this country, which is anti-woke except for Jews, right? So Trevor Phillips specifically, and I mean, he's a controversial figure. I think often he says interesting things, but he's a controversial figure because he's willing to break taboos. So when it came to sort of Islamophobia, he's made documentaries saying, I actually think we should be able to speak clearly if there are any problems within the Muslim community, sort of defending, saying there may be a nation within a nation and this is a big problem. And guess what? There were some Muslims who said that what he did was wrong. So Naz Shah, a very prominent Muslim, said some of the things he has said on public record would not be acceptable to any minority community. Now, if we treat Muslims the same way that Trevor Phillips wants us to treat Jews, that means he's committed a hate crime, essentially.
Yeah.
This idea that we can run a country, that we can live in a multicultural society when everyone gets to define the oppression against themselves it's completely unworkable. And I mean, a big difference between Zach Polanski and Corbyn, and we'll talk about lots of the similarities, is that I think he actually pushed back very strongly. Zach Polanski saying we do have to distinguish between perceptions and then objective, actual abuse. Right? We need to look at data. We need to look at evidence. The fact that people think a march is anti-Semitic doesn't make it anti-Semitic. Now, with reference to the Macpherson report, which Trevor Phillips sort of kept referencing, I think it does make the reasonable point whereby police should record as a reported hate incident if someone feels like they have been abused or if they have been subject to a hate crime. And I think that's perfectly fair enough. And I also do think that if many people in the Jewish community are saying a demonstration is anti-Semitic, then of course we should pay attention to that, right? I think if any group or if any members of a minority community are saying that they feel like they are being subject to a hate crime, sure, we should take that seriously. It doesn't make it true, right? To make it true, you have to look at what actually happened and you have to look at objective evidence. Now, I mean, as Zach Polanski says, he's been on those marches. I've been on many of those marches, and the objective data and evidence in front of my face was that this was a very peaceful group of people who were outraged that there were women and children being killed halfway across the world by a government that wants to expand its own borders, who are getting the support of our government. So again, it's similar to Corbyn in that they're trying to call the anti-racist racists, all coming before a local election. So if you think back to all of the Corbyn rows, they often, even if the incident happened a while ago, would all get brought up in the run-up to an election. So Jeremy Corbyn with the mural, obviously the stupid mural that he was stupid to have ever commented on. But that happened, I think, in sort of 2012. In 2018, sort of end of March, there are local elections coming up. Oh, suddenly, this is a big story. It was always the case, just before a key election, things get dug up, which can then get spun in a sort of sinister way. And everyone's just watching this on the TV thinking, I don't really understand what's going on, but I'm a bit bored of hearing about this. It seems like that leader is a bit incompetent, or maybe they're a bit sinister. I can't really follow the details. And that's how it works, right? Because everyone just sees. I don't think people can really explain what Zach Polanski may have done wrong, but all they're hearing is headline on the radio, Zach Polanski, anti-Semitism, Zach Polanski, pro-terrorist, and that just sort of casually gets absorbed. And that's why this is so, potentially effective. Let's hope not.
And the exact same people rally against cancel culture. The exact same voices. And like you say, there's not a clear line of attack necessarily against Zach Polanski other than this retweet. That was a substantial thing they could criticize. It's generally, you need to deal with this issue in your party. And we can talk, and we will talk about the comparisons with this line of attack to what we saw with Jeremy Corbyn. But it's so different in many ways, right? Jeremy Corbyn could have been the Prime Minister in 2019 and 2017. Of course, they thought it was impossible before 2017, so they didn't really bother. After 2017, this stuff goes into overdrive because he could have been the Prime Minister. Now, if you do think that guy's a racist, I obviously don't think that. If you do think that, I can see why the stakes are raised, right? Zach Polanski's not going to be the Prime Minister. Zach Polanski's going to lead, he's a Jewish guy who's going to lead a party maybe of 40 MPs. You cannot compare it to an MP. He also doesn't have the same record. Zach Polanski was one of the people that was calling Corbyn's Labour Party anti-Semitic a few years ago. It's quite extraordinary. And the reality is, and we'll talk about this more over tonight's show, but also over the coming days and weeks, is that fundamentally, if you criticise Israel, some people in the British media and political landscape will call you an anti-Semite, fundamentally. Even if you agree with them on every single aspect of this debate at home, domestically, everything. Adopt the ayat sharia, you expel every candidate they want you to get rid of, you agree with them on what kind of speech is permissible. If you support an independent, free, autonomous Palestine, the cause of the Palestinian people, there is a certain section of these people who will oppose you, smear you, try and get rid of you by fair means or foul. And let's be honest, it won't be very fair. Now, there have been issues with Green Party candidates, it's important to say, who have been found to make anti-Semitic comments ahead of Thursday's elections. Last week, 2 Green Party candidates were arrested over alleged anti-Semitic posts online. And while the figures aren't known precisely, the media has reported that, quote, a number of members have been suspended from the party over such posts. Senior Green Party figures, on the other hand, have called it a handful. So presumably we're talking around 5, 6, maybe a dozen people. We don't really know. Probably several in all likelihood. That hasn't stopped some people, though, like Hadley Freeman in The Times, accusing the Greens of being, quote, full of Jew-hating candidates up for election. I'm just so tired of this tone, frankly. So does the Green Party have an endemic anti-Semitism problem? That was the question posed by Laura Kuenssberg on Sunday. She asked Polanski precisely that question on the BBC.
Is somebody who expresses that, or somebody who says that Jews are cockroaches, or somebody who shares claims saying that Jews are commanded by the Old Testament to kill children, are people who express those kinds of views, are they fit for office? Should they be running as candidates in your party?
No, absolutely not. And as a Jewish person, those comments disgust me. It's important that we let the disciplinary process take its place, and that's exactly what we have.
Why are there people then on the ballot for the Green Party who have expressed those sorts of views if you say they shouldn't be running for office?
Well, as you know, when people are on the ballot paper from nomination day, it's impossible to withdraw them.
But
just
some of
because
these concerns were flagged before that. You're right, sometimes parties find out about things after the event, but some of these things were flagged before the ballot papers were printed. Some of these candidates are still running as part of the Green Party with people campaigning for them around the country.
I don't know about those individual cases in terms of that being flagged, but let me answer more widely. I think we clearly do need to have a better vetting process, and that's something I've taken away from this election.
So do you have a problem with anti-Semitism in your party?
I think there's a problem with anti-Semitism in society. We have 4,500 candidates. We have a handful of cases where anti-Semitism has been accused. One case is one case too many. But I don't want to do whataboutery, but you have Nigel Farage, who has 20 people saying as a child he made some pretty anti-Semitic.
You
and
say
he's
you
evaded
don't want
scrutiny
to do
today.
whataboutery, and then you mention another political leader. And of course, we will talk to all the political parties about these issues, and we have talked to Reform about it on other occasions. But do you believe that you have a particular problem with anti-Semitism in your party?
No, I don't believe we have a particular problem compared to wider society and other political parties.
In terms of those candidates who have been discovered to have expressed views like that, would you tell people here today, don't vote for them, they don't stand for you?
That's right.
I can't believe we're back here again. I genuinely can't believe we're back here again. And I sincerely think it's quite possible that in 20 years' time, there'll be Novara Media, 20 million subscribers on YouTube. There'll be some insurgent left-wing party. And they'll say, you know what, we should try and do something about child poverty, and the entire media establishment will be calling them anti-Semites. Now, you might think these answers are pretty reasonable, or you might think that Polanski needs to do more. But the Labour Party has abandoned nuance altogether. This was a new campaign ad posted by them on Monday.
The word anti-Semitic has lost all meaning. I've yet to see a Zionist act in kindness or with love and compassion. Today, England has a government overrepresented with Zionist Jews, and it appears they care more for Israel than England. The leaders of Israel and Gaza conspired to carry out what happened on October 7th for financial gain. The London ambulance attack, of course it was a false flag. Ramming a synagogue isn't anti-Semitism, it's revenge. takes serious effort not to be a tiny bit anti-Semitic. The money-grubbing thieves have built mountains of money over centuries. Jewish cockroaches. I don't believe any of these things. I've lived in the UK almost 60 years. I've lived happily in a wonderfully diverse community as a Jewish person. None of these statements are criticisms of Israel. They are all stereotypes, demonizations, or conspiracy theories of Jews at large. They are anti-Semitic. They are racism towards Jews. But every single one of them was said or written or shared by people who are standing for election for the Green Party in the local elections this year. Some of them for the place I live, perhaps for the place where you live. I don't want to be represented by people who think like this. And I don't think you do either.
We were just listening to that, and the first one that you heard there, the first apparently anti-Semitic thing, and of course many anti-Semitic things were just said there a moment ago. The word anti-Semitic has lost all meaning. I mean, if you say that, are you now a racist? And by the way, you hear that all the time, don't you? The word Islamophobia has lost all meaning. People say that all the time. I don't presume that if somebody says that they're an Islamophobe. Personally, I don't agree with Labour that we should have some definition of Islamophobia. I don't agree with that. I believe in free speech. Anyway, we'll talk about this more over the course of the rest of the show. Some of that might be sticking, what you just heard with that advert there. More in Common have released some polling on the popularity of the various party leaders today. And it appears to show that Polanski's approval rating has fallen some 14 points over the last week. He's still far ahead of Keir Starmer, but he's dipped below the likes of Kemi Badenoch, Ed Davey and Nigel Farage. It's worth pointing out, however, that More in Common doesn't appear to have started tracking Polanski until fairly recently, probably around early April. So there's some sucker there maybe for the Greens, but it's certainly not good. Michael, on a very basic level, it's kind of bizarre to see this level of intensity and attack against a party led by a Jewish guy with 5 MPs, which has no hopes of winning the next general election. At least when we saw it against Corbyn before 2019, you know, 2-party system, one party wants to win, the other party is led by this guy. Again, it's about high stakes, right? It makes sense. The stakes are incredibly low, comparatively speaking, and it's like the Labour Party and much of the media establishment have just got a bazooka out. You know, and they've gone, let's blow this guy up, metaphorically.
It's exactly the same unholy alliance when you've got sort of an opportunistic Labour right, the right-wing press, the Tories, everyone piling in, the Israel lobby, yes, I'm pretty sure they're involved, who are all coming in at once to try and destroy a person. Now, in a way, this is a bit of a natural experiment. Now, obviously the stakes are quite high, but in terms of what I'm interested to see, when it came to Jeremy Corbyn, it was always difficult to sort of work out what would have happened were he a bit more competent in terms of sort of rebutting or acting swiftly. So my opinion when it came to the Labour Party under Corbyn was they should have been much quicker kicking out people who were saying sort of anti-Semitic things that were sort of anti-Semitic, or if they were borderline but weren't about Israel. Just quickly get rid of them. You know, I think he sort of dawdled for a bit too long, but then also be very explicit and very firm and very outspoken when it comes to the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And I think Corbyn sort of failed really to do both of those, and also he was not very effective at rebutting arguments put to him because he got a bit annoyed in interviews, and you know, it wasn't really the job he was designed for, let's say. Whereas Zach Polanski so far, I mean, I talked a lot on Friday about how I thought the retweet about sort of how the police tried to disarm a man holding a knife who just stabbed 2 people. I thought that retweet was a mistake. But how Zach Polanski has responded to the anti-Semitism smears is perfect. It's pitch perfect. He said, those people who have said these things, don't vote for them. They're going to get kicked out. But also, we need to be very clear about the difference between perception and reality, and criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic. And I think and I suppose the way it's a natural experiment is because it is possible that he does everything right and still the combined force of the Labour right, the right-wing press, all the other political parties and the Israel lobby is enough to bring him down. Now, we saw with sort of someone like Zoran Mamdani, they tried, and he was so articulate that he managed to push back and was, won the election, was a very successful politician. So maybe it's possible. I don't think it's we shouldn't yet be completely resigned to the fact that if you upset this coalition of people, you can't go anywhere. But yes, it's interesting in a way of what could have happened were Corbyn slightly more articulate on questions such as this. I mean, another thing that I've been a bit surprised by is my analysis of why this was always so damaging for Jeremy Corbyn was that because so many backbench MPs were sort of aligned with the right-wing press and the Israel lobby, opportunistically often it wasn't ideological, it was just because they wanted to bring this guy down, then all of the political editors, whether or not they were ideologically aligned, could say this is a party management story. So it was just constantly a party management story. The leader of the Labour Party is opposed by all of these Labour MPs who are calling him racist. Doesn't matter whether or not they're right. This is an interesting phenomenon in and of itself, so let's report about it endlessly. Now, with Zach Polanski, you've got a party leader where a bunch of other political parties are calling him bad. Now, that's not an interesting phenomenon. That's normal politics. So the media can't really say, we're not making a judgment as to whether or not this is anti-Semitism or if there is, fire with the smoke. So I suppose I'm interested in how long they can keep this going and whether or not that I overstated the extent to which the reason why this was able to do so much damage to Jeremy Corbyn was because of the fact that backbench MPs were willing to make it a party management issue.
I'd also add, he's Jewish.
Yes,
right? So he's a much
helps.
better media performer with regards to defending stuff like this. And I agree with you. Jeremy didn't want to do that. He didn't have a history of having to do it, right? I think it really shook him as a guy who'd been an anti-racist, campaigning on these issues for decades. All of a sudden, he was being called something very different by the media. He was very unprepared for that. Zach is better at that stuff, but he's also Jewish. And if they can do it to him, you're right that this line of attack and this coalition is a pretty big deal. I don't think they can, quote unquote, bring Zach Polanski down. What they can do is blunt him. What they can do is kill hope. So what's behind the heightened pressure on the Greens? The party continues to surge ahead of Thursday's local elections, as well as national elections in Scotland and Wales. As a result, they're putting a huge amount of pressure on Labour, especially in areas the party really cares about, like London. A new MRP poll from More in Common shows how tight the race between Labour and the Greens will be in at least 6 London boroughs, with the two parties being within a 5-point margin in each of them. In Hackney, the Greens lead Labour by 3 points, and in Lambeth, Southwark and Islington, there's barely a point between them. Those predictions give you some sense of the collapse of the Labour vote in the capital, but it's only partial. This graph compares how Labour fared in the equivalent local elections in London 4 years ago in 2022. Back then, it got over 40% of the vote share in 21 out of London's 32 boroughs. That's 2/3 of them. On Thursday, they're not expected to get over 40% in a single one. A catastrophe in the capital for the party of government. But More in Common has also modelled how far Labour's popularity has fallen in London since the 2024 general election based on those results. Labour has lost 15% of the vote share when it comes to how people in London now intend to vote, whereas the Greens have been by far the largest beneficiary of that collapse, picking up 10%. Of course, they did very well by their standards in London 2 years ago. The Greens are putting pressure on Labour in London, but they're also doing it in the national elections in Scotland and Wales as well, where Labour's vote has collapsed. And in the northeast and north of England, reform is going to take a large bite out of Labour dominance in multiple local authorities. A significant factor in the crisis now facing Labour is, of course, Keir Starmer's decision to appoint Epstein pal Peter Mandelson as Britain's ambassador to the United States. In Scotland, that led Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar to distance himself from the PM last month. And writing for the newspaper The Independent today, Sarwar has made clear to Scottish voters how disappointed he is in Starmer, making clear that a vote for Labour north of the border is not a vote for the Prime Minister. In Wales, Labour is about to be wiped out. And even there, the party's leader, Eluned Morgan, seems to have accepted that after making a possibly Freudian slip at a speech last week and calling on voters to cast their ballot for Plaid Cymru. Across England, the disaster awaiting Labour is huge, with some predicting a loss of 1,800 council seats. That's almost 3/4 of the seats the party currently holds. So 2,500 seats they'd be contesting, which they presently hold. 3/4 of those could be lost. It would be the biggest hiding for a party of government in local elections ever. I think Margaret Thatcher in 1990 lost 200. Keir Starmer could lose 2,000. I mean, that really gets to the extent of Labour's problems, doesn't it?
So I think they're projected to lose 75% of the seats that they currently have, which are up for election on Thursday, which is, if you are a Labour councillor up for election or a Labour sort of member of the Senate or Holyrood, you have a 75% chance of losing your seat if you're up for election on Thursday, which is incredible. Also, I mean, to go back to our first story, it is so depressing because we could be having a really interesting conversation about the many different directions that the country could go in. Like, we have real problems. And I do think there are real questions to ask the Greens about, right? I don't think they are tested when it comes to policy. What's their position when it comes to house building? They've said nice things. Do they believe that actually we do need to massively increase the supply of housing in London? I'm not sure. You know, they've said sort of typical left-wing things. We want to keep affordability. We want social housing. All good. But do you want more houses in London, significantly more houses in London in 4 years' time than exist now? Because that is the divide on the left. Lots of people say, oh, supply doesn't matter. I obviously think it does. Our audience will know that. I think we could be having loads and loads of interesting policy debates. And the Greens might be weak on some of them, right? The Greens might be weak on things like policing. They might be weak on certain sort of economic policies.
HS2, historically, right?
HS2, yeah. There are. I don't think that the Greens are bulletproof by any means. But the fact that we are having a debate which is completely concocted about this Jewish guy being anti-Semitic because he is against Palestinian women and children and men getting killed is like, it's a huge displacement activity. And it's just so cynical, because I would have respect for the Labour Party if they were to say, look, the Greens are offering you easy answers. Maybe you hate us, but that's because we're doing a difficult job. Yeah. We've actually got, lots of competent people in various councils around the country. I'm willing to hear that argument. Maybe it's not true, but I'm willing to hear that argument. And they can say, oh, the Greens, they're actually NIMBYs, they're actually this, that, the other. Let's have that debate. That would be interesting. That would be, informative to the public. Maybe we'd all learn something. Maybe we would get closer to finding what is actually the problem in this country that means that our productivity is so low and affordability is such a problem.
Yeah.
But the fact that in the entire run-up to these key elections, which could completely reshape the political map, we're having this completely fake debate, I just find fundamentally quite depressing.
Yeah. I think a big reason why Britain can't address major problems is because the centre-left and the centre is unwilling to have a policy debate with the left. And that doesn't mean the left is always right, but it asks important questions. And if you're literally saying an entire sort of ideological pole of attraction, millions of people are not legitimate actors in the system, I think clearly you're going to have an imbalanced political debate. The Greens, I agree with the Greens on many things. I voted for the Greens in the last general election. I disagree with them on other things. On HS2 at the last general election, they were wrong. I think on nuclear power, they're wrong. I don't want to build loads of nuclear power stations, but I don't want to shut any. I don't want to make the same mistake as the Germans. So let's have that debate. And I think I would have so much more respect, like you say, for Labour if Keir Starmer said, you might not agree with everything we've done. We've got rid of the two-child benefit cap. We've brought rail into public ownership. We've done things that the left has wanted and asked for years. This is the most left-wing government in this country since before Margaret Thatcher. There's a good argument for that, by the way. I thoroughly dislike the man for different reasons. His personality, how he delivers certain things, the arguments he makes against certain people. This stuff, what's happening right now, is literally what will stop me from voting Labour, right? The way they conduct politics is what will stop me from voting Labour. There are lots of policies I agree with, some I disagree with. There are other policies I disagree with from the other parties. It's the way they do politics. I voted for my Labour councillor in these same elections 4 years ago because they're a good candidate, they're a good councillor. But now I'm thinking, I don't want to contribute to this idea that this is a legitimate way of doing politics. I don't want to contribute to that, which means, voting Labour, right? I don't want to legitimise that. So either I don't vote or I vote Green. And that's not because of the candidate, that's because of Keir Starmer. And I wonder, actually, how many people Labour are going to lose doing this. Ahead of these local elections, I don't think it's many, right? Because they weren't going to get many anyway. But if they're just going to do Project Fear and negativity for the next 3 years, I struggle to understand what their strategy is. Following the stabbing attack in Golders Green, in which 2 Jewish men were very seriously injured by a lone man with a knife, Metropolitan Police Commissioner Mark Rowley has become increasingly political. Last week, he weighed into the discussion of whether anti-genocide marches in London have played a causal role in a recent increase in anti-Semitic crimes. He said they had, without providing any evidence, and asserted this.
I'm really troubled by what we've seen is many of these marches, they set out with an intent to march near synagogues, etc., and every single time we put conditions on to prevent that. But even that intent causes me concern that they repeatedly ask to do such things.
Speaking to the Times, Rowley repeated those extraordinary claims, saying this about the march organisers. Their initial suggestion for their route, their march, has involved walking by synagogue. Each time we've prevented that, each time. We've put conditions on. The fact that features as the organisers' intent, I think that sends a message that feels like anti-Semitism. That may be a fair or unfair inference, but that's the message it sends. Now, those marches are organised by the Palestine Coalition, which includes groups like the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, the PSC, and Stop the War. They've now hit back at the Commissioner, demanding he withdraws his, quote, incomprehensible and defamatory comments. In a letter to Rowley, the organisers said this. We are very concerned to see that you have publicly stated the organisers' initial suggestion for the Palestine marches have involved walking by a synagogue, in his words, and that this sends a message that, quote, feels like anti-Semitism. These claims are incomprehensible and defamatory. The truth is that at no point have we ever requested to, quote, walk by a synagogue on any of our marches. We have no interest in doing so. Police recordings of our meetings with you will confirm this. We can and will provide the email evidence to back up these facts. We urge a speedy public retraction of your statement and the accompanying scurrilous claim of anti-Semitism. Michael, what do you think of that?
This is so insane, right? So the claim, so sort of that email makes it seem like there's this claim and did they ask to walk by a synagogue or did they not? Now, the basis of this allegation, this like complete smear from the Met Commissioner is that Stop the War wanted to start and did start a number of protests at the BBC. This is Oxford Circus, right? So it's one of the busiest parts of London, one of the most...
busiest part, right?
The busiest part in London, one of the most normal places in the country, or probably the most normal place in the country to start a march. Now, it happens to be the case that 350 metres away, so a third of a kilometre, a number of blocks away, there is a synagogue. The march didn't go past the synagogue. The idea is that you can't start a march anywhere which is half a kilometre away from a synagogue, even if it is in the literal centre of London. So no one is allowed to protest the BBC anymore because like 7 blocks away, there is a synagogue. And that was a ridiculous demand when it was made by the police. So what the police sort of suggested at the time is that, you know, this, or sort of the arguments I was hearing is them saying like, obviously, you know, it's completely legitimate to want to start your march at the BBC, but there are some people who do feel uncomfortable, so maybe you could sort of move it to a different place. This is now being, which I think was unreasonable at the time, right? You should be able to start a march at the BBC, at Oxford Circus, regardless of whether a few blocks around there is a synagogue. But now it's been contorted to be that they specifically wanted to march past a synagogue. And that would feel like anti-Semitism. If it had been the case that Stop the War Coalition kept putting forward to the police a march route, which sort of, you know, went a bit around the corner and went down this sort of little side route. And you're like, why have they chosen that side route? Oh, there's a synagogue there. That would be incredibly sinister. That would feel like anti-Semitism. But they started a march at the BBC, walked down Regent Street, like the busiest road in London. And now that's anti-Semitism because a third of a kilometre away, there is a synagogue. It's insane. And it is, like, this is incredibly defamatory. Now, it's against an organisation, not an individual. So I don't know if you can sort of, if that will work in court. But I think this is so obviously, like, despicable. Like, it's really difficult to take anything Rowley says seriously in the future because that is just so misleading to any ordinary member of the public listening to what he said.
Should he resign?
For that, I think yes. I mean, I think that is just a complete outrageous smear.
I agree.
And it's because if you are an ordinary member of the public listening to it, like I'm fine with people disagreeing, but I do think it is really quite despicable if you make a statement from a position of authority where a person sort of listening to that on the radio will reasonably infer something which is the complete opposite of the truth. Because if I had listened to that and I didn't have any prior awareness of this, I would think that's outrageous, right? But that's because I would have heard what he said there and assumed that Stop the War Coalition wanted to go past the synagogue when that's just not remotely the case.
Yeah. Trust in authority is a two-way street, right? You can't expect young kids to not run through turnstiles and go on the tube and to not do graffiti or shoplifting or anything. Young people should obey the law. They should respect authority. It works both ways. You can't expect that and then lie as the head of the London Metropolitan Police Service. And it's not just untruth, it's untruth couched with feelings. I feel this, not that. Well, look, you're the head of the Met, right? You're there to uphold the rule of law. Very often they do the opposite. Regardless, that's your job. You're not there to have feelings. I just find it extraordinary that he even thinks that's a permissible way to conduct public communications for the most senior police officer in this country. Now, this row comes ahead of a large pro-Palestine march set to take place in London on the 16th of May, commemorating the Nakba of 1948. On the same day, far-right agitator Tommy Robinson has also organised a march in the capital, the second of his, quote, Unite the Kingdom rallies. But while there's a growing campaign to link the Palestine march to racism, people seem much less worried about the far-right on the streets of our capital. Tory leader Kemi Badenoch has supported the idea of banning the Nakba Day protest. But what about Robinson's protest?
Would you consider taking similar action against the march that's planned for the same day as the pro-Palestinian march, May the 16th, the rally being organised by Stephen Yaxley Lennon, Tommy Robinson, a convicted far-right activist? Would you consider banning that
Well,
too?
is he creating a climate of intimidation and violence that is resulting in 2 people murdered in Heaton Park, 2 people nearly murdered in Golders Green? I'm not saying that we shouldn't have a right to protest. There is something specific that is happening at these marches that is different from the sorts of protests we've seen previously. People are not protesting about domestic issues. They're protesting about international issues. It's costing us a fortune. It's resulting in the normalization of violence towards a minority group. I think that we need to do what we can.
But some people might feel, and some people did feel, at that last big march called Unite the Kingdom, many people there were protesting perfectly peacefully. But some people did look at that march and feel intimidated. Right. Some people did look at that and think, I don't want to see that. There were concerns at that time, and there were arrests, and people were charged with racially aggravated offences at that particular march.
Right. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You haven't been able to say who that was targeted against. I am saying that there is something very specific happening to Jewish communities.
Who was targeted? Well, let's listen to one of the speakers at the last Unite the Kingdom protest. This was Valentina Gomez, who has since been banned from entering the UK.
It's either now or never, because if these rapist Muslims take over, they will not only rape your women, they will behead your sons, just like they did on October 7th in Israel. So we either fight now or we die. And we're fighters. We are warriors of Jesus Christ. And in the words of the great Charlie Kirk, Islam is the sword that the left is using to destroy Christian nations and to destroy every Christian nation across the world. So do not make peace with evil. Destroy it.
You're welcome to go back and watch the footage from that rally. Other speakers are on stage. They're talking about Britain being colonised, call for a ban on any non-Christian religious expression in Britain, and describing the country as sliding into cultural darkness because of the presence of Muslims in the land. Show me one person saying anything like that about Jewish people on stage at a Palestine march. Michael, we're going to talk about this a little bit later with a LBC clip and Lewis Goodall. But you hear it all the time. Ban Islam. Ban Islam. Ban Islam. Ban public representations of Islam. Ban mosques being... You hear it all the time. Now, you can agree or disagree with a mosque being built, right? People are going to have all kinds of issues with a building of any kind built in their local area. That's fine. But clearly, in the broader conversation about banning a religious building of a particular faith, we hear that all the time. And again, I think that's permissible. We live in a free society. People are allowed to say these things. But what people like Kemi Badenoch are saying is we have a totally different set of rules. You know, if you say ban Judaism, that's hateful, right? If I go on a stage an anti-war protest and I say ban Judaism, I'm in big trouble. But it's the oxygen that these people breathe at these protests with Tommy Robinson, and yet crickets. What are your thoughts?
I mean, it's disgusting. When I watched that was one of the moments I was sort of shouting at the TV screen. Kemi Badenoch, who are those marches targeting, though? Who could they possibly be targeting? We reported at the time, I mean, it's really, really explicit, violent language about Muslims. And she's made two claims there, which is one, they're not targeted at anyone, and two, it hasn't led to any violence. Now, obviously, I completely dispute the idea that anything said at Palestine demos has led to any of the horrific violence we've seen over the past week. But there is also an emergency when it comes to violence against Muslims or people perceived as Muslims, right? So last week, Alfie Coleman was convicted of plotting a terror attack, which he planned against, quote, the invaders. He wrote a manifesto saying he wanted to provoke a, quote, race war. He'd attempted to buy an AK-47 and had researched a mosque as a target. He wanted to, quote, shoot refugees, right? Now, is there a direct connection between what was said on that stage and that action? I've got absolutely no idea. Is it more plausible that what was said on that stage would lead to that action than a bunch of people saying stop bombing Palestine would lead to a guy thinking that actually what that is a call to kill or attack Jews in North London? The week before, John Ashby, a white man, was convicted of raping a Sikh woman while racially abusing her. He followed her off a bus and forced her way into her house. As he forced her to take her clothes off, he referred to himself as her British master. He referred to his penis as being, quote, white British. Like there is so much of this stuff where there is a much clearer sort of arrow of causality between the kind of things said at the United Kingdom rally to these actions. Now, I don't think this is a reason to ban those. I mean, there's a debate to be had about banning those marches, but I'm not here saying because these things have happened, we have to ban those marches, right? I think it is quite important that we sort of separate rhetoric from action and we separate political arguments from sort of violent extremists who may or may not have been inspired by it, right? But the idea that there is something uniquely, it's just wrong, right? And again, like we said with Trevor Phillips being anti-woke except for Jews, now everyone is pro free speech except for Israel, and it's mind-bending.
Do you think that she knows there's a double standard here? So she's saying to who? You know, I can say with regards to where I live in Portsmouth on the south coast, in just recent months, people have been assaulted in a park. Muslims have been assaulted in a park where there are lots of, South Asian families go basically during the weekends to chill out, have barbecues and whatnot. A man had a machete, went to a mosque. He had to be pacified. That's just in one city. There's lots of these stories, right?
There were riots. People set fire to an asylum hotel.
I'm just talking about one small,
I know.
one small city in England, literally just in the last several months. There was a Your Party meeting. People tried to shut that down. All kinds of things were said. And this is the case in every town and city in this country. Every major town and city in this country has a story like that, more or less. Maybe not the machete one, but instances of clearly anti-Muslim hate. And she's saying, against who? I mean, do you think she believes that, or is she playing dumb?
I think everyone is just being incredibly opportunistic. It's like, obviously there is an organised Israel lobby. There are some Jews who do feel under threat, partly because of misperception, partly because there are genuine sort of increases in anti-Semitism. But I think the sort of most despicable people in all of this are the politicians who think that they really don't care about the consequences of this. They don't care if having such an obvious double standard is probably going to increase anti-Semitism, 100%. Let's face it. I mean, if people are already sort of the belief that Jews control the media and control politics and sort of they're protected when other people aren't, if you have a leading politician going on the television saying that Jews are under this exceptional threat and we have to ban all these marches, but this march where they say that Muslims have to be banned and kicked out, that's fine, and these hate crimes aren't really hate crimes, right? It is the most irresponsible thing you can possibly do. And I don't think it's because Kemi Badenoch cares about Jews. I don't think it's because she cares about Israel. I think she sees this as an opportunity to win some political points against a politician she doesn't like in a political movement that she sees as her sort of rivals.
She certainly needs it. And that's interesting you make that observation because we have quite a unique dynamic, right? The two legacy parties are both dying. You know, Labour are going to lose maybe 1,800 councillors on Thursday, but the Tories are going to lose councillors as well. Very unusual when you're the party of opposition. Normally you do well in the subsequent set of local elections. So there are high incentives, the two legacy parties, to be as vitriolic as possible, not just the Greens, but also Reform as well. But right now it's the Greens, and this is the line of attack they're adopting. And the media has a really high set of incentives as well, because of course, if you're a journalist at The Sun or The Times or the BBC, you have dozens, maybe even hundreds of MPs' contacts, councillors' contacts. You know these people. You've invested in time and resources into building those relationships. Oh, my goodness, on the idea of, 50, 60 Green MPs coming along. I don't know them. I've not built those relationships. And I have to say, it's fascinating. This is just an aside. But the attacks against Reform have really diminished since they accepted Robert Jenrick. It's fascinating.
That's interesting.
Really, really fascinating. It's like a whole different set of rules since Braverman, Jenrick have joined them. Because I think it was almost like the bat signal going out to legacy media. Okay, these guys are legit. It's not just the Farage and Zia show anymore. In recent weeks, there has been a deluge of claims regarding anti-Semitism. Some of that is malicious, purely the result of political expediency. We have local elections soon, of course, and Labour, well, they're not going to do very well. Some of it is legitimate. There has been a spate of attacks against British Jews recently, and members of various political parties, including the Greens, have been disciplined over comments relating to Jewish people. But it's also simply true and accurate that what some people regard as unacceptable, anti-Semitism, others view as entirely legitimate and indeed appropriate criticism of Israel. Basically, the definitions are fundamentally different. It boils down to this. Is anti-Zionism and a critique of an apartheid state founded on colonial dispossession inherently racist? Some people think yes, others no. This video, shared by an account titled Green Party Exposed on X and claiming to show a conversation with a Green Party candidate called Philip Notley, gets to the heart of the matter.
Can you just repeat what you told me? They should definitely what?
Israel shouldn't exist.
Israel shouldn't exist?
Yes.
That is the most anti-Semitic thing anybody can say.
Not really.
Not really? So where should all the Jews go in Israel then?
They can stay there.
They can stay there, but it shouldn't exist. So where are they going to go?
No, it should be Palestine.
Oh, my God. Okay. Well, I've got your name, and thank you for showing us the vile hatred against Jews.
I don't have any vile hatred against
Yes,
Jews.
you do. You just asked for Israel. That's the Jewish homeland. There's 57 Muslim countries in the world, and there's one Jewish state, and you just asked for it to be eradicated. This is why the Green Party are going to fail, because of people like you, the vile hatred of Judaism. And this is why Jews are being murdered on the streets of England, because of people like you, because of people like Philip Notley. Get off my property.
I love how chilled he is, right? He's just calmly stating his political views.
I definitely know who I'd prefer to go for a pint with,
Oh, crikey, definitely. Israel shouldn't exist is the most anti-Semitic thing anyone can say, apparently. Well, what about Palestine? Should Palestine exist? If you don't think that, is that racist? If you think Palestine shouldn't exist, there shouldn't be a Palestinian state, which, by the way, is the de facto position of revisionist Zionism, it's the de facto position of the Israeli government, it's the de facto position of most Zionists. Liberal Zionists say, well, we'd like a two-party state, but they don't really mean it. Some do, but they don't really mean it. Increasingly, that's just, I think, inescapably true. Are those people, is that racist? I don't think there should be Israel. That's racist. I don't think there should be a Palestine. That's fine, actually. And again, this lady genuinely thinks what she's saying is true. I wonder if she's even thought about it intellectually. There are 57 Muslim countries. Why can't the Palestinians go to one of those? There's only one Israel. Again, this is so racist. What, Palestinians who are from the Eastern Mediterranean, Arabs in the Eastern Mediterranean, they're meant to go and live in what, Morocco, Indonesia, Oman? They can move anywhere, but we have to live in this tiny patch of land. Again, it's an incredible double standard, founded on an extraordinary 19th century colonial mindset. And to say this, by the way, all true, is not racist. Now, you might say, well, no, I support a two-state solution. Israel should exist, but a different kind of Israeli state, different kind of politics, different kind of constitution. I mean, people can have a range of views on this, right? They'll say, well, no, that's necessarily a racist state. He's arguing for one state, a one-state solution, which, by the way, some of the most formative voices of early Zionism wanted that. That's what they wanted before, certainly before the Shoah and the Holocaust. Certainly, many people said that. It's the idea that you support a one state, a single state for Jews and Arabs in the Holy Land. If that's your view, you think that should happen. The idea that's now the most racist thing you can say against Jewish people, when, by the way, he's saying they can all stay there. You might think he's wrong. You might not think it's practicable. It's not racist, is it?
It was also a very dangerous thing to say, because obviously there is an argument, is anti-Semitism overstated, is it not, yada, yada. Now, obviously the events of last week show just how real anti-Semitism is, and the Jewish community in Britain is small, and I can see why they feel under attack, because there are lots of incidents, and it's a very small number of people, right? They're in a very geographically sort of concentrated area in North London. So I can see why they feel under attack. There is lots of real anti-Semitism, but having a viral video where someone says Israel shouldn't exist is the most anti-Semitic thing that anyone could possibly say. Like, you listen to that and say, oh, people can't really say many anti-Semitic things then, can they? Because that's fairly anti-Semitic. No, I don't think it is anti-Semitic. And again, this is a thing that I think, Zach Polanski's done very well so far, and everyone has to be very clear on. Like, your opinions on the constitutional arrangements of another country do not have an impact on whether or not you're a bigot, right? This is international relations, right? It's international relations, whether or not you think Israel-Palestine should be a two-state solution, one-state solution. If you sort of say, I think all Jews should get out of the Middle East, that probably would be a bit racist. There are many people who are Jewish who are indigenous to the Middle East, and that would sort of imply some kind of expulsion, which would be racist. But if you're saying everyone on that bit of land should be able to stay there, which is what that dude is saying, but it should be one state called Palestine, fine. If you think it should be called Israel, but everyone should get a vote, fine. If you think it should be an apartheid colonial state, I think that's pretty racist, actually. But also, that's your opinion about a different country. I feel like we kind of need to separate people's opinions about different countries from like identity politics in the UK. Otherwise, it's unviable.
But she's basically saying, if you don't want an apartheid state in this strip, if you don't want an apartheid state, if you're saying that actually we need one state where you have equality under the law for everybody, if you don't want apartheid, you're the racist. And you're not just a racist, it's the most racist thing you can say against Jewish people. It's crazy. Look, again, I'm half Iranian. We have an ongoing war with Iran and the United States. And there are people on my timeline on X saying that we need to balkanize Iran, right? They would say we need to break off Azerbaijan and Khuzestan and Loristan and Kurdistan and, whatever. You can say that, whatever. You can say that. It's another country, like you say. It's not racist to comment on the constitutional arrangements of a foreign power. I would say that's unwise. I think it's horrible, personally. Iran's an ancient country, and it's had these minorities within it. I think it destabilizes the region. I think it creates millions of refugees. But I don't think you hate Iranians if you say that. I have no idea who you are. This lady, she's never met this guy before.
Also, before we move on, fair play to that guy. If someone sort of starts shouting at you and saying you're the most racist person ever because your opinions on Israel-Palestine, I think his response is just going, okay, I don't think so. Like, he did very well.
Yeah, that's exactly the sort of person I want in local government. Good luck, Philip. I shouldn't really say that, should I? But
I don't know if he was standing or was he just a candidate?
He's a candidate, somewhere, but I just like that calm and that ability to make his argument. We've just come out of a bank holiday weekend with local and national elections ahead of us this Thursday. In other words, we've not only had much to discuss, but a lot of time to discuss it. Maybe a few beers as well in the May sunshine. A deluge of takes and analysis before what will likely be the most important round of elections outside a general election in recent decades. Part of that happened on LBC on Sunday, on a show hosted by Goodall. He spoke to a range of guests about the stories leading the news, including Labour's Secretary of State for Transport, Heidi Alexander.
Is he really saying that if you go on a march to protest entirely legitimately against what the Israeli government is doing in Lebanon and Gaza, and someone you don't know, has nothing to do with you, says that at some point on a march, that you yourself are calling for terrorism against Jews?
I listened to that interview, and what he said was he thinks that everyone's got a responsibility to call it out. And knowing, as we do, what the Jewish community here, which is violence towards Jews when people shout globalise the Intifada. He was saying that actually it's on all of us. You know, if individuals go to a protest to express their concerns about what is happening in the Middle East, then actually, you know, individuals on that march, we've all got a responsibility to speak up.
Have you ever been on a
act.
protest where someone says something you don't agree with? I'm sure you have. But that didn't mean presumably you ought not to have gone on the protest.
I mean, the protests, you know, that I went on, you know, many decades ago now, you know, were always quite good-spirited. I actually went on the protest against the war in Iraq at the time, and I don't remember that.
Given 1 million people went on the Iraq war march, someone may well have said globalise the Intifada. I don't think anyone would have legitimately turned around to you and said that you were legitimising Jew hate.
What we have seen is, you know, repeated marches. We have given the police power now to look at where, you know, how you deal with this cumulative impact. You know, there is more protest that's happening in the country at the moment.
If the Prime Minister believes that, he truly believes that, why doesn't he just ban them?
Banned marches?
Well, yes. If he believes that those
marches... Well, he's
marches...
also said in that same interview that he gave this week, Lewis, that, you know, he
This was in his statement that he made from Downing Street, is it?
Yeah, and, you know, look, I listened to a long interview that he's given in the last couple of days where, you know, he's actually talked about the fact that he has long defended the right to peaceful protest in this country, and that's not changing now.
Well, except that he's telling people who go on some of those protests that by standing next to people saying globalise the Intifada, they're calling for terrorism against Jews.
Well, look, no, we've dealt with that. I've given you...
Have we?
Yeah, because I've explained in the same sentence, he was just saying that if you're hearing that type of, you know, pretty extreme and intimidatory behaviour, perhaps we've all got a responsibility to call it out.
What does that even mean? If I go on a protest and I now see a placard 100 meters away, I'm wearing my glasses, I can see that far, and it says globalise the Intifada, I have to run over there, I have to call them out, I have to wag my finger. What are you even talking about? The idea that 1 million people on a protest are somehow culpable for what maybe 100 people on that protest think, or 1,000 or 10,000 or one person. By the way, what's the this is so arbitrary. What's the line? If it's just one person, 1,000 people, at what point does it matter? None of this is remotely coherent intellectually. In that same conversation, Goodall quizzed Alexander.
What he said about the actions of those two brave Metropolitan Police officers was pretty disgusting. He's rightly apologised, but I do think someone that is so quick to jump to their phone to be retweeting that type of content is not really fit to be leading a political party in this country.
Well, so tweeting something stupid is disqualifying from leading a political party, but appointing a friend of one of the worst paedophiles of our age for one of the most prestigious diplomatic posts we have, that's not disqualifying.
Well, look, we've had weeks of discussion about Peter Mandelson, and the Prime Minister has said he made a mistake, and he's apologised for that. I've never seen, you know, our Prime Minister, you know, criticise the Metropolitan Police, who were doing an incredibly brave job. You've only got to look at that video and the footage of what was going on there. And
no, he just appointed someone who was a friend of one of the worst paedophiles of our age, but that's not disqualifying. But
and actually
retweeting something stupid, that is disqualifying.
But based upon information where, you know, he and his staff weren't given full information, he was effectively lied to about the nature of the relationship between Peter Mandelson and Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, you can certainly see why they don't want a leadership contest in the Labour Party if this is the calibre of their MPs. Look, people should be prudent about social media use. Absolutely. Particularly political leaders. They should set an example. But one retweet should disqualify someone from public office? Really? Well, if that was the case, nobody would be in politics. I'd have been banned dozens of times. Maybe these people think I shouldn't even be allowed on YouTube because of bad retweets. Who knows? And clearly, it isn't worse than appointing Peter Mandelson as ambassador to Washington. Grow up! Why do I feel like the entire political class make less sense than my daughter, who, by the way, is 2.5 years old? Their complacency, sense of entitlement, and incompetence has gelled into this manufacture of a completely parallel reality where one retweet means you can no longer be a legitimate actor on the national political stage.
I mean, again, the one retweet wasn't even... I disagreed with the retweet. I've been over this. Lots of people got angry at me in the comments. But he didn't retweet something racist. He didn't retweet a threat against anyone. He retweeted a video which was questioning some police kicking a guy in the head. Right now, I think, given the context, as a party leader, that was a bit of a mistake. It's not outrageous. It's fine. Right? This whole thing is bonkers. And I mean, the Heidi Alexander one in a way, because with Kemi Badenoch, when I watch that, it infuriates me because she's so clearly trying to, I suppose, whip up a frenzy, which is so irresponsible because it is going to sort of heighten anti-Semitism, it's going to heighten Islamophobia. It's just really bad for community relations in the UK for a completely single reason. Heidi Alexander, you watch that, she's not enjoying it. She doesn't believe a single thing she's saying.
You think?
Like, look at that. I mean, he's like, you've been on demonstrations that didn't know. She's like, oh, I haven't been on demonstrations for a while. Yeah, maybe that. I don't know. We've covered that, haven't we? Have we? Oh,
you're not the producer of the show.
I don't know. Let's just move. She seemed like she just didn't want to be there. I mean, because no one could really bother to defend Keir Starmer anymore now because they don't think he's going to be there for very long. So I think like she was just like, can we wrap this up soon, please? Because I know I'm not persuaded. I know I'm not convincing anyone with this interview. That was the impression I got watching that. Sad.
I don't know. I think they've spun so much nonsense. I do genuinely believe it's almost like a psychological condition now of much of the Labour Party establishment. They've just spun so many alternatives. They're constantly weaving a new reality. We knew 400 seats would vote Leave in a second referendum. They weave this new reality. No, there's an overwhelming appetite to vote Remain. Well, you want to stay in the EU, but these guys don't. And even if it's a majority of the country, then they're geographically concentrated in such a way that you'll lose in the general election. We saw it with Corbyn. They're constantly, Boris Johnson, agree or disagree, you should think maybe he should leave or shouldn't leave. COVID, of course, was a very important and unique political context. But they're constantly trying to manufacture outrages, you might say sometimes legitimately, but they're constantly trying to manufacture outrages. And it feels to me that the Labour right, their idea of politics is literally telling you what to feel. Not what to think, not how to think, what to feel. You should feel outraged at this. Why? I don't know why, I just feel outraged. On that same show, Goodall also spoke to Conservative MP Helen Whately.
Well, your leader, in fact, has said that anti-Semitism cannot remain acceptable in supposedly polite dinner party conversations. What does she mean by that? What does she have in mind?
That's just one of the things that's been pulled out from an interview and an article that she's written on this, talking about the fact that it's almost become normalised, I guess, in the currency, and somewhat under the guise of pro-Palestine, and to some extent...
Have you been at dinner parties where people have been anti-Semitic?
No, I haven't. But what I have heard is people thinking that if they are kind of advocating for Palestine, then they're kind of somehow on the side of on the side of virtue. Well, actually, when you look at some of the protests that have taken place, which have been actually strongly anti-Israel, including people calling for the end of Israel and for Jewish people to be out of
But criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism are not the same thing, are they? And indeed, it's dangerous to allied them.
But what we're seeing is the two things actually being bundled together, and people not realising that if they are getting involved in that, they're becoming part of this whole movement against Israel and against Jewish people.
You can go on a protest protesting Israeli government policy and not be anti-Semitic.
So I think there's the problem is that what we've seen happen with some of the protests is as they've become...
There are Jews on these protests, they're not anti-Semitic.
Some of them have become breeding grounds for anti-Semitism and extremism. And this has to be called out. It is not okay. They're not just peaceful protests, they are truly hate marches.
Again, it's a political line, right? They are hate marches. They're telling you what to feel. Hate, strong word. They're telling you what to feel. Not what to think. This is my argument. This is my policy. How you should feel. It feels like that's the whole of politics now, particularly in the days before these local elections, right? It's Project Fear, not just from one party against another, every party against every other party, including, by the way, Reform against the Greens, which to me indicates they kind of joined the uni party. We'll talk about that, I guess, in the weeks ahead. Let's see what Whately said next in response to a fantastic question from Lewis Goodall.
Would you be happy with, say, Tommy Robinson's marches, which included Elon Musk calling for the overthrow of our government? You're happy for that to go ahead?
I don't believe that Tommy Robinson here is talking about wanting to get rid of Israel and eradicate the Jewish people.
But he has
that is a completely different thing.
But at multiple demonstrations, not just his, but including Britain First rallies, for example, we've seen crowds chanting things like "Allah is a paedophile," "Muslim bombers off our street," signs reading "Stop Islam," "Ban Islam," or framing Islam as inherently violent or incompatible with Britain. Lots of Muslims would see that and think, that threatens me. Should they be banned?
So I want a tolerant society, and I want people to be able to, freely protest and express their views. But what I don't want is a situation where we start tolerating events which are basically calling for the eradication of the
They're
Jewish
calling for
population.
Muslims to be left to be deported from Britain.
All right, yeah, but I don't want to see marches where Jewish people are basically under threat and it's seen as somehow acceptable. Calling for
and that's completely fine. I'm just wondering where the line is, because you're saying that that's a problem, and lots of people will agree with you. But there'll be lots of Muslims who think that those things I've just described are also a problem, make them feel unsafe. But you're saying that's fine.
I think so. If somebody's calling to death to all Muslims, I'd be against that too. I'd treat those things equally. But that is not what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is different things going on here. And as I said, what is very clearly wrong and what has gone wrong in this country is allowing marches which were essentially calling death to Jewish people.
But what you're saying, you're saying that not everyone. Not everyone clearly at those marches for Gaza and Palestine would be racist. Clearly they wouldn't be. But you're saying that some of the people there are racist and are calling for violent, appalling things. So on the basis of that logic, you would ban Tommy Robinson's rally, because some of the people, not all the people there are racist and calling for appalling things, but some people are.
No, I've explained my position. It feels to me like we're going... Well, it feels like we're going round and round in circles. So I don't see the benefit in going on as to one thing versus another.
I'm just wondering what the consistency is. That's all.
It is consistent. I'd say, and
two calls for violence against two different groups.
No,
one's bad, one's okay.
Calling for a death to a group of people, that is not okay. That is not the right thing in our country.
Ban Islam. So ban Muslims, basically. How is that not really dangerous to a group of people when you're saying ban Islam?
I'm saying
ban Muslims from this country.
Calling for the death of a whole, of people, of the Jewish people, that is not something acceptable.
So ban Judaism would be okay.
So what we're saying, I think you're going into hypotheticals. What about this? What about that? We've seen what's happened. What we've seen happen.
He got you, Helen. It's not hypothetical. It happens. Absolutely correct. Nobody is at a Palestine demo on a platform saying, kill every Jewish person in the world, 15 million people. Nobody's saying that. If they were saying that, first of all, it's incitement, it's a criminal offense. We don't know about that case. If they were from overseas, they would not be allowed back in the country, as happened with a speaker who was at a Tommy Robinson protest. That's not happening. So if they're talking about things which aren't happening, to stigmatize and demonize a group of people, you have to ask yourselves, why? Michael, you said before Heidi Alexander was kind of phoning it in. She didn't really believe in what she was saying.
She was worse.
She was worse.
She was much worse. I just like the first question. Like the first answer was really phoning it in, because he's asking a question about consistency. You're saying there are some racist people on this march, so the whole thing should be cancelled. And, I think that's massively overstated. But there are also some racist people on this march, so why shouldn't that be banned? Well, Tommy Robinson doesn't want to get rid of Israel. Is that... No, that's not the basis of the question. The basis of the question is that the only offensive thing that one can say is not about Israel. There are other issues in the world, right? She's like, oh no, why would we ban a march if it's not about Israel? I thought aren't we talking about Israel? We can talk about other things. There are other issues in the world than Israel, right? But it just doesn't compute for her. It is consistent.
Because I say so.
It's very similar to Heidi Alexander saying, we've dealt with this. Which is, it is consistent. It's like, fair play to Lewis Goodall, because he seemed like, he'd had his Weetabix, he'd had his coffee, he was kind of enjoying that. He has got these two centrist politicians who've sort of been given their lines, have no game whatsoever, just like, oh, can we, shall we end it now? It's like he gets to decide when it ends, which is, I thought it was fabulous.
No wonder the country's got problems. If this is the caliber of the political class, and they can't even talk about the problems that afflict this country. Now, you might be saying, we've done a whole show on this, because it's literally all the media's talked about for the last 4 days. And they're doing that, and the two major parties doing that, because we have local elections on Thursday. no wonder we have major problems. And by the way, inflation's about to go really high. The costs of British debt, higher since 1998. These are real stories that we could have talked about, we should talk about, we will talk about over the coming days. But the political class and the media don't want to talk about any of this stuff. Just like with Corbyn, right? 2015 to 2019, they didn't want to talk about policy. And all of a sudden, as soon as Corbyn lost, they're like, wow, Britain's in decline. Have you noticed? Nothing. Local authorities aren't funded anymore. Nothing works. High streets look like crap. How did that happen? Why isn't anybody talking about this? The left tried to talk about it for the last decade, and you just wanted to talk about why Israel is wonderful. Heaven on earth. Michael, any final words before we wrap up?
No. I mean, in terms of real issues, the problem with this country, we're going to spend most of tomorrow's show talking about infrastructure in China. So we're going to move away from the media bubble, talk about how we actually could have a more functioning public sphere.
We'll be making the case for a one-party state. Look, not my personal view. I like multi-party politics, although I could be persuaded. Just joking. This has been a really, really fun show. We're running slightly over, gone for an hour and 20. We normally do an hour. If you like what we're doing here at Novara Media, you can, of course, support our work. Go to novaramedia.com/support. I don't know about you. I started this organization with my co-founder, James Butler, precisely because for years, decades, I saw these kinds of stories in the media. Nobody was pushing back. And I thought in 2010, 2011, it's time we do something differently. If you agree, if you think we need a media voice that is not willing to just repeat the nonsense from the likes of the BBC, Sky, Channel 4, the papers too, support our work. Doesn't mean they're always wrong. They do some very good work. But on these major headline issues, particularly in British politics, my goodness, you're looking at one big bandwagon. Help us break it. Support Novara Media. Thanks again to Michael, and thanks to everyone for tuning in tonight. Come back tomorrow for another show from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.